best leader is going to leave. You don't know when, and they might not know when, but it's going to happen. And when it does, the question won't be whether you're sad about it. The question will be whether you're ready for it. Today, we're talking about succession planning, not the HR fluffy checkbox version, the real version, the kind that protects your organization, develops your people, and builds a leadership legacy that will outlast even you. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get into it. I want to start off the episode today with a story because this one's going to hit a little differently when you hear it from the outside looking in. Picture a VP of operations at a mid-sized manufacturing company who's been there for 22 years. 22 years. That's not just tenure. That's institutional memory, vendor relationships, process knowledge, and shortcut awareness that just walks out the door when she leaves. All of that information is never captured anywhere in any job description. She knows which clients need a phone call over an email. She knows which vendors will negotiate and which ones won't. She knows that the third shift supervisor over in Building C is the most valuable person in the entire organization that nobody talks about. And then on a random Tuesday morning in March, she walks into the CEO's office, sets down a folder, and gives her 2 weeks' notice. She's accepted a dream role that she just couldn't turn down. The CEO congratulates her genuinely, and he means it. She absolutely deserves this opportunity. He walks her out, closes his office door, and sits back down in a chair and thinks one single thought: we are absolutely not ready for this. And you know what? He's right. The 6 months that followed her resignation were rough. Client relationships that were running through her frayed almost immediately. Processes that existed only in her head walked out the door with her. 2 high-performing managers resigned in absolute frustration because the organization felt like it was making up the playbook as it went. The final estimate for productivity loss, recruiting costs, and client churn: $2.3 million in 6 months. Just sit with that number again for a second. $2.3 million in 6 months. And here's another part that I want you to sit with for a second. None of that needed to happen. None of it. Not $1 of it. Not one resignation. Not one lost client relationship. All of it was preventable with one thing that the organization never bothered to build, and that's a succession plan. Here's the question that I usually get at this point of the conversation. If succession planning is this important, why don't more organizations do it well? A 2023 study by Deloitte found that fewer than 14% of organizations felt confident that they had enough leaders ready to step into critical roles. Fewer than 1 in 7. The other 6 were just running on hope and good intentions. Hope and good intentions don't show up on a succession plan. They show up on your crisis management bill. In my opinion, there are about 3 reasons that leaders typically avoid this work, and I want to be direct with you about all 3. The first one is time. Development work doesn't show up on a quarterly earnings report. It doesn't generate a win that you can point to in this month's leadership meeting. It's long cycle. It's quiet. It's low visibility work that competes with everything else that feels more urgent. It keeps losing the priority battle because it doesn't create an immediate fire when you ignore it until it does. The second reason for avoidance is that it honestly feels a little morbid. Nobody loves sitting in that particular meeting. Leaders typically are wired for action and forward motion. Anything that asks them to confront endings tends to be just quietly postponed. The third reason is the one that nobody says out loud in the conference room, and that is ego. I'm not saying that leaders are arrogant. Most of the leaders that I work with are thoughtful, mission-driven people, but there's a quiet, subtle fear existing in even the best of them. That fear sounds like this: if I develop somebody good enough to fill my role, do I make myself obsolete? That thought It's a whisper, not a shout, but it does influence decisions. And the answer to that particular fear is the exact opposite of what that particular fear assumes. The leaders who are truly remembered long after they've left a role are not the ones who held on the tightest. They're the ones who built something that didn't need them around to hold it all together. Their legacy isn't the revenue that they generated or the problems that they solved. Their legacy is the leaders that they grew. I want to shift gears for a minute, pun intended, and revisit Toby's taco truck because sometimes the clearest lessons come from the simplest contexts. As we've come to know, Toby's Taco Truck is an owner operator food truck operation that serves the finest tacos on wheels. Next to the barbacoa, one of the signature items is an al pastor that regulars will drive out of their way for. People don't choose Toby's Taco Truck because it's convenient. They choose it because of how good the food tastes. And that specific flavor is the reason that they'll pick his truck over every other option that's available on the same line. Truck had a line cook named Destiny, who had been with Toby since day one. Destiny made the al pastor perfectly every single time. She knew off the top of her head the exact ratios, the timing, the technique. It all lived in her hands. Now, Toby always meant to document the recipe and her technique. He kept saying that he would do it when things slowed down. And in the food truck business, things don't slow down in April or June or September. Then Destiny landed a position at a new restaurant that opened up downtown. It had more stability, better hours, a little better pay, and she gave her 2 weeks notice. Toby was genuinely happy for her, but there was also a little bit of quiet panic. For the next 3 months, the truck served adequate al pastor. It wasn't great, but it was adequate. The regulars noticed immediately. Two of his best weekly accounts, a corporate lunch rotation and a brewery partnership, dropped him from their schedule like a hot potato. His Saturday farmers market gig that accounted for roughly 30% of weekly revenue didn't renew its contract. It took Toby 8 months of trial and error and retraining a new line cook to get back to where he was before Destiny left. Not because her departure was a disaster, but because he never asked or considered anything about succession. He never asked, well, what happens when this person isn't here or that person isn't here? Now, scale that story up from a food truck to an entire department, a division, or perhaps even the entire organization. The principle is identical. Critical knowledge living in one person's head isn't an asset. It's a single point of failure. And single points of failure don't ask for your permission before they break. There's a simple exercise that I use with leadership teams that I call the hit by a bus test or the abducted by aliens test. I know, morbid theme or kind of freaky, but just stay with me for a few seconds. And here's how it works. Pick your 5 most critical roles, not your 5 most senior roles, but the 5 most critical. The ones where a sudden vacancy genuinely hurts the organization, not just inconveniences it. For each one of those roles, ask the following 3 questions. Question number 1, if that person left today with 0 notice, hit by the bus, abducted by the aliens, what would stop working immediately? Second question, who in the organization could step up into that role and perform at roughly 70% effectiveness within 30 days? And third, what would it cost you in time, money, relationships, and momentum to operate without that role filled for 90 days? Most leadership teams going through this exercise discover 2 things. First, that they have fewer answers than they expected. And second, they identify the problems clearly once they're forced to look at them honestly. The third question, the one changing the actual conversation, when you quantify the cost of being unprepared, the case for investing in leadership development becomes very easy to make. It's no longer a soft, fluffy, feel-good HR initiative. It's a financial risk conversation. And executives at the top of the org chart, pay attention to conversations about financial risk. Now, here's the version of this exercise that makes the room usually go apply those same three questions to yourself. If you walked out the door tomorrow, what would stop working? Who could step into your role and perform at 70% effectiveness within 30 days? What would it cost the organization if your seat sat empty for 90 days? That's the real succession planning question, not just for the roles below you on the org chart, but for yours. When leaders start thinking about succession, they almost always default to their top performers. Top performers are valuable, but top performers and high potential leaders are not always the same person. And underestimating that distinction matters enormously for how you approach the development conversation. Technical excellence and leadership capacity are completely different muscles. Someone can be exceptional at the work but yet not ready to lead others through it. Somebody else might not be the top technical performer, the best maker of the widget, but might have leadership capacity that can be developed right now. Treating these as the same person or the same thing leads to poor succession decisions and oftentimes frustrated employees. After years of working with leadership organizations on development, there are some clear signals that separate high potential leaders from high performers. The first is curiosity beyond their lane. High potential leaders will ask questions about things that aren't their job. They want to understand how the finance team thinks, why the marketing strategy works the way it does, and what's keeping the operations team up at night. They're not being nosy, they're not putting their pitchfork in the wrong pile. They're thinking in systems, and thinking in systems is a leadership trait. Secondly, they ask why more often than they ask what. When a directive comes from leadership, the high performer asks, okay, what do you need from me? But the high potential leader will ask questions like, why are we approaching it this way? Are there any alternatives or different approaches? Those are two completely different conversations. One of them just executes the work. The other one improves how the work gets done in the first place. And the third, they build trust with their peers, not just with leadership. This is a signal that most organizations undervalue. Managing upward is relatively easy. Earning the respect and trust of the people beside you on the org chart is usually much harder. When someone consistently is described by their peer group as someone you can count on, that's a leadership signal that is worth some serious attention. The fourth is they get better under pressure, not just when conditions are favorable, but when something goes wrong. And something, as we all know, will always go wrong. How do they show up when it happens? Do they get smaller, more avoidant, or less communicative? Or do they get clearer, more focused, and more decisive? High potential leaders get clearer. The fifth trait, they take accountability without being prompted. And this is the one that I keep coming back to because it's the clearest separator that I've seen in over 15 years of working in this particular space. When something doesn't go as planned, a high potential leader doesn't wait for a performance review to acknowledge it. They'll come forward and name what happened, own their part in it, and show up with a path forward. And that isn't just a personality trait. That's a leadership competency that you observe and measure and specifically develop. When you as a leader see all five of those in one person, stop what you're doing right now and start investing in that person before somebody else notices and you lose them to an organization that pays a little closer attention than you did. Succession planning isn't a one-time exercise done at the annual offsite and then filed away until next year. It's an ongoing process and it needs some structure to be truly effective. Here's a 5-step framework that I have seen work across organizations of all sizes and all industries. And I'm going to walk you through each step and tell you where most organizations fall off because that is where the real work lies. Step number 1 is to identify. Map out your critical roles and current bench depth for each one. Be brutally honest. A "we'd figure it out" isn't bench depth. You need to name actual people. If you sit down to complete this map and discover that you can't name anybody for one of your most critical roles, this is no longer a planning exercise anymore. This is an all-out emergency. Step 2 is to assess. Once you've identified your candidates, evaluate them against leadership competencies, not just technical performance. Your technical reviews will tell you what people do. Leadership assessments tell you what they'll do when things get complicated. What's their track record when their particular plan falls apart? How do they handle critical feedback? And how do they lead when they're not formally in charge? Step 3 is to develop. This is where most organizations fall short, and it's the most important step. Development isn't a training course. It's not some video library, and it's not a seminar. It's an intentional set of experiences designed to stretch that candidate's leadership capacity in specific, targeted ways. For one candidate, that stretch might mean an assignment that leads a cross-functional project outside of their particular area of expertise. Another, it might mean structured mentorship with a senior executive who has already navigated the specific challenges that this candidate is likely to face in that particular role. For a third, it might mean taking on a visible, high-stakes presentation to the board of directors. The development plan needs to be specific to the person, not generic to the role. What does this particular human need to be ready for this particular opportunity and this particular responsibility? That is the question that you need to answer. Step number 4 is to test. Give candidates real responsibility before they'll fully need to carry it. This is where development actually takes root. Let them lead a high visibility project with real stakes. Let them make a decision that has actual consequences for the entire team. And here's the part that most leaders skip because it makes them uncomfortable. Let them fail at something small while there's a safety net still in place. Controlled failure is one of the most powerful development tools available. It builds judgment in a way that success never does. You learn what you're made of when it costs you something. Step 5 is to review. Succession planning goes stale without retention. Build it into your leadership calendar as a recurring strategic priority, not an add-on agenda item. Things like quarterly updates on candidate development progress, an annual deep dive on role criticality and bench depth, and at a minimum, one core executive level conversation per year specifically about the leadership pipeline. Most organizations will do step 1. Some manage to get to steps 1 and 2, and very few consistently build and maintain steps 3 through 5. The organizations doing all 5 are the ones whose leadership bench doesn't become a crisis at exactly the wrong moment. I want to spend a few minutes on the thing that ties all of this together, because without it, the framework doesn't actually move. That thing is the conversation, but a specific one. The direct, honest, development-focused conversation between a leader and somebody that they're investing in. Here's what I see consistently across multiple organizations. A leader will identify somebody with real potential. They'll think about that person often and advocate for them in leadership discussions. They'll mentally include them in succession planning conversations, and they track that person's development progress. But during all of that, the team member is completely unaware. They're sitting in the same organization thinking, well, I'm not sure if anyone here sees what I'm capable of. And some of them might start looking around. They might find a company willing to tell them what this organization was just thinking. That silence is expensive. It's not just an engagement problem, it's a retention problem. And retention problems often become succession problems. When you see genuine potential in someone, tell them, be direct, and say the thing. Hey, I see some real leadership capacity in you, and I would like to invest in your development if that's something that you'd be interested in. That conversation right there changes absolutely everything for the person on the receiving end. It changes their relationship to their work. It changes their level of commitment to the organization, and it dramatically increases the likelihood that they'll stay with the company. Once you've gotten over that hurdle, then ask them, what do they want? Where do they want to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What do they feel underprepared for? What do they need from you that they're not currently getting? Most leaders will skip those questions because they're a little afraid of what they'll hear. But ask them anyway. The answers given are the roadmap. Once you've asked the question and listened to the answers, you then need to do the thing that makes the conversation credible. Follow through. Development conversations that lead to nothing are worse than not having them at all. They will create a specific kind of delusionment that's very hard to recover from if you can ever. The team member in question will feel seen only to be immediately abandoned. And if you open that door, you have a responsibility to walk through the door with them. Here's where I want to bring this all home, because I think that succession planning, when you look at it from the right angle, is really about one thing. And that one thing is legacy. Not legacy in the abstract poster on the wall sense. Legacy in the very practical, concrete sense of what you leave behind when you're no longer in the room. Every leader eventually leaves their role. Retirement, promotion, a better opportunity, a life change, or just the ordinary passage of time. That transition is coming. The question isn't whether you'll leave. The question is whether you'll leave something worth inheriting. The leaders building truly lasting organizations are not always the most brilliant or the most driven. They're the ones treating their people not as resources to be managed, but as successors to be developed. They're always thinking one step ahead, not just what do I need to accomplish this quarter, but who do I need to develop so that the organization accomplishes great things long after this particular quarter. That shift is a completely different frame, and it produces fundamentally different kind of leadership culture in the organization. Here's what I want to leave you with today. Not 5 action items, not a worksheet, just one thing. This week, have one honest development conversation with one person on your team that you've quietly identified as somebody with real potential. Tell them that you see it. Ask them what they want and ask them what they need from you. And then do something concrete in response to what they tell you. That's it. One conversation. Succession planning doesn't start with a spreadsheet, a consultant, or at an offsite retreat. It starts with one honest conversation, and then another, and then another, and then another, until your organization's culture is one where developing the next generation of leaders isn't some special initiative. It's just what you do. So go and build something that will outlast you. That's a wrap on today's episode. If this one landed for you, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway was. Drop it in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or reach out to the website at toby-talks.com. If you're ready to go deeper on leadership development, succession planning, or any of the other topics that we dig into here on Toby Talks, make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss what's coming next. Until then, keep developing your people, keep building your bench, and keep building something worth inheriting.